If you see me walking down the street and I start to cry each time we meet, walk on by.
Welcome to the Rock's Back Pages podcast. My name is Barney Hoskins and I'm in London with my colleagues Mark Pringle.
Hi, Barney.
And Jasper Murison Bowie.
Hello, Barney.
And joining us for this episode to discuss all that's new in the world's largest archive of music journalism is the man who's been dubbed the British Ambassador of Soul, Mr. David Nathan. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Welcome to you too, Barney. And Mark and Jasper.
Welcome to David's world.
Yes.
Right. So David has been championing and writing about Black American music for 60 years. Exactly, I think. Mm-hmm. We'll confirm that in a moment. He was a mainstay of Blues and Soul magazine. And during his 35 years in New York and Los Angeles, he interviewed pretty much everyone from Michael Jackson to Whitney Houston. And most recently, David put together a huge box set of Dionne Warwick's classic recordings for the Scepter label. And later we'll hear clips from an audio interview that David did with Dionne in 2012. Let's start with your initial gateway into American R&B / soul, which I believe was the Beatles' early covers of songs by like the Miracles and the Shirelles. Tell us about that, David. Tell us about your very early musical initiations.
Well, as you correctly pointed out, Barney, it really came through listening to the Beatles. I grew up in London, in Kilburn, northwest London, and like most teenagers, the time I was entranced, or entranced is probably the correct word, by the Beatles and who they were, not just the music, but their appearance, the haircut, everything. And, I was, and while the previous music I was listening to in the household wouldn't have necessarily been quite in that vein, of course, I was a fan of the Beatles. And I remember vividly buying the albums. And particularly, there was one in particular, which I'm sure you all can correct me on this, but it had a number of covers. I think it was Please Please Me, or was from the Beatles, with the Beatles. But anyway, what I remember vividly is at the back of the album, it had notes about the songs, and in particular, the Shirelles' Baby It's You, the Miracles, You Really Got a Hold on Me. And I was intrigued by these names of more than anything else. Who are the Shirelles? Who are the Miracles? And that led me to be curious about about the originals. I didn't actually go seek them out at the time, but that was my first awareness that they were actually cover versions. So now we have to fast forward a little bit to my first time seeing a concert, which happened to be the Beatles next door to where I lived, State Cinema in Kilburn. And the special guest, he wasn't opening act, was Mary Wells. So now I'm starting to be immersed a little bit in the whole world of the world of the Beatles, but being aware of them and their influences. And then here comes Mary Wells. And then it will be the same year. I'm going forward a little bit fast here because earlier in that year is when I, became aware of, we call her here Dionne Warwick, and in America, Dionne Warwick. And that would have been courtesy of Cilla Black, on whom I had a massive crush. And I felt, and I had a physical fight, a very intense argument with one of my schoolmates who was championing Dionne's version of Anyone Who Had a Heart. And of course, he told me the reason I liked that was because I fancied Cilla. But anyway, by the point being that after Anyone Who Had a Heart, Dionne's follow-up recording was Walk On By. And all the Cilla Black photographs on my bedroom wall came down and they were replaced by Dionne photographs. Such is the fickle nature of teenagers, even back then.
Yeah, it has to be said that Burt Bacharach himself said he really loved Cilla's version.
He did.
He had a lot of respect for Cilla.
I don't know that went well for Dionne because there's a photograph which actually exists of her smoking a cigarette. Dionne, this is facing Cilla Black. It was on the cover, I think, of the Daily Mirror. It was in the Daily Mirror. I still have a picture of it somewhere. I mean, a copy of it. they were not best friends, shall we say? But anyway, by the by, I listened to Dionne, and Walk On By remains my favorite record of all time. And yeah, I have to say that it wasn't just the recording, because I wasn't versed enough into at that time in the whole world of production or how it was put together. It was the song and her delivery of it, and it happened to also coincide with another crush. This was a real crush, not a Cilla Black crush, on a girl who went to school across the street from me. And there's a whole story to that. We'll cut it out for now, but just had a crush on her. Her name was Marilyn. And it was really a case of deep, unrequited love from my perspective. But the music that helped me get through this dreadful crush, was Dionne Warwick's first album that was released in Britain. As it was called Presenting Dionne Warwick, and it was a compilation of her previous recordings for Scepter, but the biggest thing was Walk On By, and anyone who had a heart. And I actually still have the physical LP that's been with me everywhere I've ever been, the one I begged my mother to give me the pocket money to buy. So there you go. That's my entry, in a sense, into the world of what we would have called R&B then. We didn't use the word soul back then. Might have called someone soulful, I think, but it wasn't. It was the world of R&B. And so that was the initiation point. And then in terms of my writing, that would have gone to me reading an interview with Dionne about some of her favorite American artists. And she named Nina Simone, who I had never heard of, and most people in Britain had never heard of in 1964 at all. And I thought, well, who's this Nina Simone? And I was working at a record shop on Saturday mornings, and I asked the manager, do we have any records by Nina Simone? He said, oh, yes, she's a jazz artist, which was not correct description, but that was the best you could come up with. And then I get this LP called Nina Simone at Town Hall, a live recording. And I remember putting the needle on the arm of the record and crying. It impacted me so much. That first song, I was like, oof.
Black is the color of my true love's hair.
And that really was the beginning of my journalistic career. And as much as probably about 6 months later, I asked to start the Nina Simone Appreciation Society in the UK. And Nina had not yet been here. And of course, the manager was thrilled, said, yes, you certainly could start that. And a few months later, Nina arrived in London, and I had started doing the newsletters. So technically, my first writing would have been in the Nina Simone Appreciation Society newsletters for all of 30 people.
Am I right in thinking that you started it as the Appreciation Society because you thought fan club was too sort of low level?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, there was a precedent for it because there was the Tamla Motown Appreciation Society, which was run by the late Dave Godin. And then there was the first one I ever joined, which was the Dionne Warwick and Cheryl's fan club that morphed into the Scepter Wand Appreciation Society. So Appreciation Society had a little bit of a lofty kind of flavor to it. And the fan club was like, right. Yeah. Of course, Nina referred to it as a fan club. She did.
Oh, did she? That's ironic. After all that effort to impress her.
Yes.
There's a lot of appreciation going on in those days, wasn't there, David?
Yes, there was.
Did you intersect with people like Dave Godin at that point, or was that a little later?
No, it was in the same time period. In fact, Gloria Marcantonio, who was the founder of the aforesaid Dionne and Cheryl's Club, as it started out as, once I started the Nina Simone Appreciation Society, suggested that I meet Dave Godin because he was like the godfather of R&B kind of, we wouldn't call it R&B itself, but he was the godfather of the fandom of R&B. That's a very funny way of saying it, but he was the guy. He started listening to music in the 50s, Ruth Brown and so forth. So it was not like I needed his a blessing, but it was a good idea to, for him to meet me and for him to kind of say, yeah, this is great. So it wasn't like a blessing, but it was more like a included, having me included. And one other thing to say that is interesting in this whole story is that at a gathering in Littlehampton on the beach in September, I think, September of 65, Gloria had put this together, and it was mostly fans of the Dionne and Shirelles, members of that club. And someone brought a record player that had to be run by battery because of you could plug it in at the beach. And somebody put on an LP, and it was an import, a treasured import, and the person singing was singing Walk On By, my favorite song. Who is this? I said, who is this? And they said, Aretha Franklin. Because back then there was not much knowledge that her name was Aretha. So it kind of goes that way. It's like Dionne led to Nina, because Nina had mentioned Aretha Franklin to me in a little bit of a tirade at the airport. She says, "Oh, David, have you heard this? Do you have a singer here who copies one of our American artists?" Nina was prone to rage sometimes, as we know. And I said, well, she said, you singer here, Dusty Springfield, white singer. She's copying someone note for note. And she said, have you heard of Aretha Franklin? And of course I hadn't. So I kind of lied. I said, oh, I think so. And then a few months later, I hear Aretha. So it's got Dionne leads to Nina, leads to Aretha.
That all makes very good sense. And as it happens, the first of the pieces we're featuring by you on the Rock's Backpage's homepage is, I think, the first piece you wrote about Aretha for Blues and Soul in May 1968. And I'll just quickly quote something from that. And it's really right on the money in terms of where she was at that point. And you write Columbia Records, which was her first sort of commercial label, evidently felt the only way to get Aretha across was to blanch her style by giving her standards to revamp, and in so doing she succeeded in pleasing no one. R&B fans felt her material too sophisticated, and jazz fans felt her phrasing too allied to her gospel background, and pop fans hardly ever got to hear about her at all. I think that's pretty accurate. But 68, she's kind of already the queen of soul, isn't she? Mm-hmm. Lady Soul has just come out, and that's got Chain of Fools on it and Natural Woman. Just extraordinary stuff.
You're the key to my peace of mind, 'cause you make me feel, you make me feel, you make me feel like a natural woman.
So from 65 to 68, I guess you saw this transformation of Lady Ree. So just tell us about that, and then how you came to first interview her and became like a lifelong friend of hers.
Yes. Well, I did discover, just so you know, Barney, I did discover that I actually had written something about her before that one, which I will find somewhere. I can tell you what it was. So just to continue the story of myself and Dave Godin and a third person, Robert Blackmore, we started a record shop called Soul City in Deptford originally. And where Aretha comes into this particular part is that prior to the starting of the shop, Dave Godin had a magazine called Rhythm and Soul USA. And it was a very short-lived publication. But I actually did write a piece on Aretha for that. I still have a copy of it somewhere, and I'm happy to let you see it if I can find it. And the dreadful part was that CBS Records in London, we asked for a photograph, and they got a photograph from America because she didn't have any records on Columbia that I remember in Britain. Oh, no, that's not true. She did have one LP out, but they didn't have any proper publicity photographs. And the person in New York sent us a copy of Irma Franklin photograph. And we didn't realize until much later that it wasn't Aretha.
Oh, that's
anyway,
brilliant.
That's a funny story. But the point being about my connection to Aretha. So here we are. I wrote a letter to her in, it would have been the spring of 1966. I used all my pocket money from working at a record shop on Saturdays called Musicland in Wilson Lane to get all the imported Columbia LPs. And I thought, she's amazing. Oh, wow. So I write a letter to her care of her father's church. Back then, no address. So it simply said, Miss A. Franklin, care of Reverend C.O. Franklin, New Bethel Baptist Church, Detroit, Michigan. This is true story. Absolutely.
I believe you.
Yes,
I believe you.
Such is the zeal of fans, you know?
Yes.
And then she didn't respond right away. So I said, maybe she didn't get the letter. So then I did a follow-up letter to her manager, whose name was on the photograph. Ted White was also a husband. And I read a second letter. And the second letter was, I think, the one that got the response, because lo and behold, about 3 months later, my dad calls us, letter from America. So I'm rushing down the stairs, and it is a brown envelope, and it's a letter from Aretha. Now, I know everyone says, where is it? Well, hello, that was 1966. If I had that, it would be worth a fortune. But she signed letter saying, thank you so much. I didn't know anyone heard my music in England. I wanted to write back and say, no one has, but that was 1966. But the point being, that was my first connection with her. And later in that year, when we had Soul City, the way we treated ourselves at Christmas, because the shop had only been open for a short time, was by calling somebody in America. And my obvious choice was Aretha. And I called to the international operator, and they put me through, and her husband answered the phone, and he said, this is David calling from London. He puts his hand over the phone and says, Aretha, from London. And she comes to the phone, and she says, hi, very quiet voice. Hi, hello. I've never spoken to anyone in England before, which was true. So we had a little conversation, and she said, I've just signed to Atlantic Records, and I said, oh, wow, can't wait to hear your music, and I wish you a Merry Christmas. And that was how we first connected.
Great.
That's
lovely. That's wonderful.
That is a great story. And she just signed to Atlantic Records, which I'm sure most of our listeners, appreciate, was where she made almost all her greatest music. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about Blues and Soul magazine itself and your first awareness of it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, as I said, we had the shop Soul City, and John Abbey had started a fanzine called Home of the Blues. Of course, he knew Dave Godin. I'd never met John before, but Dave knew him, and John would come in sometimes to help us out on Saturday mornings. Not that we had thousands of people, but still, it was a way for him to plug his Home of the Blues magazine. And at some point, it morphed into Blues and Soul. And in terms of I still have one of the early issues, because I didn't come to the phone with it, but I can find it. Well, this isn't a video, so it won't make any difference if I don't show it to you right now. But I do have an early issue of I think I have one of Home of the Blues, but I also have one of the very earliest issues of Blues and Soul. And it was really still very much a fan magazine. And then at some point, John really got serious about it, you could say, and he changed the format of the magazine. The magazine started to take some kind of create some buzz when it became Blues and Soul. Of course, ironically, there wasn't much blues in it, and the name is still Blues and Soul because it became a brand, and you couldn't really change it to anything else. So, and you can just, and soul wouldn't officially work. So anyway, during the time period that we still had Soul City, we used to sell Blues and Soul in the shop, as I recall. So that was the beginning of it. In terms of my writing for it, there is a funny story. The first issue that I contributed to Blues and Soul, for whatever reason, Dave Godin thought was a conflict for me to use my name in there. So he insisted I write an article about, guess who, Aretha Franklin. And I had to do it under an alias called Simon Fraser. I don't know where I got the name from, made it up. So my very first Blues and Soul article is actually under the name Simon Fraser.
Okay. We'll have to.
My
seek
life
that
is full
one
of
out.
it's full of interesting twists and turns, as you could tell. So Blues and Soul, and Blues and Soul, of course, became a mainstay magazine for any burgeoning soul fan. But then soul is much more in regular use as the term, and it became the primary source of information for people who loved R&B, soul music in Britain and outside. And
Yes.
part of what made that easy was John would make regular trips to America to get to do interviews. It wasn't just like stuff where people came to Britain or they did phone interviews. He also made it his business to actually establish some connections in America itself.
I mean, it goes without saying that you interviewed through your many years corresponding for contributing to Blues and Soul. You interviewed just about everybody, right? Every major Black American performer, soul performer, and that includes Dionne Warwick. I don't know when you first interviewed her. We have a piece from December 1973, Blues and Soul, on Rock's Back Pages. I don't know if that was the first time you spoke to her, but we have it. As already mentioned, you've just released a Warwick box set on your soul music label. It's called Make It Easy on Yourself, and it encompasses, I don't know if it's all 14, but 14 of Dionne's albums for Scepter, Florence Greenberg's label. And therefore, it includes, I think all the masterpieces written for her by Burt Bacharach and Hal David. Richard Williams reviewed it in the July issue of Uncut, and as a fantastic piece of writing, as always with Richard. And I'm just going to quote one bit where he says, Dionne Warwick could handle the extremes of romance, ecstasy, and heartbreak with a hint of independence that made her an ideal voice for young women of the cosmopolitan generation, struggling to reconcile the imperatives of conventional femininity with the as yet untested freedoms of feminism. And I think that was an interesting way of looking at Dionne, because she's such an unusual soul singer, very different from Aretha Franklin. Do you want to just talk about what made Dionne so distinctive? And obviously part of that was the nature of these extraordinary songs.
In regard to her being distinctive, I think you've referenced it in a sense already, Barney. I mean, Dionne was not your everyday soul singer, although her background was very much in the same realm as Aretha's and many others, in as much as she sang in church and she was part of the gospel group, the Gospelaires, influenced, of course, not influenced by, but the Drink Card Singers were her family group. So Dionne came from gospel, essentially. It's interesting how the whole story of how Dionne and Burt Bacharach met, and we won't go into that now, but to say that she became the vehicle, as you know, as everyone knows, for the music of Burt Bacharach and the lyrics of Hal David. And we don't want to underplay the lyrics, because really without those lyrics, that we'd never know any of those songs. And she became a interpreter of songs. And I think that what gave her an edge, and she's mentioned this before, is that she had studied music. She was versed in reading music, shockingly, in a sense, unlike Aretha, who could not read music. Most people don't know that. But yeah, and she was, in a sense, a trained singer in that way, and also got a lot of her skill set from doing background work with her sister Dee and members of what would later become the Sweet Inspirations, like Cissy Houston and so forth. And by virtue of doing the backgrounds for a whole range of artists, you had Dinah Washington, Ray Charles, Brooke Benton. I mean, it wasn't just Solomon Burke and Wilson Pickett. Well, I don't know if Dionne was on that, but my point being that where she got a lot of her training was also doing background vocals. So by the time Burt Bacharach, of course, that's how he first heard her doing backgrounds on a Drifter song recording. So that's how I think she became such a good vehicle for vocal vehicle for being able to do different kinds of sound, making different kinds of music, could say. And so it's a question I've always pondered, because there are moments in Dionne's early recordings that are very much R&B, very much. I mean, you could hear her first album. It's really like, it's R&B with a pop flavor. And then it starts to shift into being more pop with an R&B flavor. And at some point it becomes something in the middle somewhere. And I think it had a great deal to do with the kind of material that Bacharach and David gave her. I mean, it's been said many times that those melodies, those lyrics, the whole combination is not easy. They're not easy songs. Some of them are very complex, and that she could do that. And she became essentially, I don't know if muse is the right word, but she became the vehicle for much of their work at the time. And it wasn't straight up R&B. It was something that was a mixture, shall we say.
Yeah, because there's almost, there's some of those songs are so sophisticated, they make you think of somebody like Sondheim, Stephen Sondheim. Mm-hmm. They're that, they're like great songs from Sondheim musicals, some of them. And I do think they are some of the greatest pop music ever made. They're just in an absolute class of their own. Mm-hmm. As mentioned earlier, we're going to hear two snippets of the conversation you had with Dionne in October 2012, when she was promoting an album called Now, which celebrated her 50 years as one of America's greatest and most distinctive singers. So it's worth mentioning that album revisited, I think, 5 of her famous Scepter hits, though not Anyone Who Had a Heart, not Walk On By. So this is the diva herself, talking about how 1962's Don't Make Me Over came about.
So there's a conversation that I had with Bert and Hal. They had promised me a song that is on the CD.
Which I know we're going to get to, yeah.
That would be my first recording after they hounded and they had, you have to record it, you got to record it, you got to, and then finally said, yes, okay, this particular song is my first recording. And I was on my way in to do a session with them from college. And as I was driving along, of course, I had my radio on, and out of the radio came this voice that I recognized, of course, being Jerry Butler, singing my song. And when
Did you pull over?
No. I kind of sped up to get to New York a little quicker. And when I finally got to New York and met with Bert and Hal, I kind of let them know that there's one thing they could never do. First of all, never break a promise to me. And most importantly, don't ever try to make me over.
All right. So did they immediately go start writing the song?
Yeah.
Just based on that?
Based on that. Hal went and put pen to paper and came up with
There it was.
Don't Make Me Over.
Fantastic.
Don't make me over. Now that I do anything for you.
It's a great conversation, David, and with someone obviously that you knew pretty well at that point, just as you got to know a lot of particularly female American singers very well. And what's interesting, she goes on to say that Florence Greenberg, who I mentioned earlier, who's the boss of Scepter, never liked Don't Make Me Over, despite the fact that it was a hit, her first, Dionne's first big hit, but she never liked it.
And one of the small things, we've got an interview with Dusty Springfield, and she says her experience of her discovery of soul music, she's in Nashville with the Springfields, and Don't Make Me Over comes on the radio, and she said she just had to sit down on her bed It's like, wow, what is this?
That is a great story, Mark. I'd forgotten you mentioned that a while back.
Can I mention also that you mentioned Florence Greenberg? Well, actually, and this is something that I discovered when we were doing this box set that you've mentioned, Make It Easy on Yourself box set. The original A side of the recording was not Don't Make Me Over. It was I Smiled Yesterday, which was on the same session. And there are actually copies, if you look on Discogs, where it has that as the A side. And I think that was, and if you listen to the song I Smiled Yesterday, you can see why Florence would have wanted that, because it's not complicated. You can sing along with it. And I don't know, I've never heard the backstory of how it got flipped over to be Don't Make Me Over, but it did. And if it hadn't, we might not have heard of Dionne. In the way that we have, I should say.
Yeah, it's probably just worth mentioning too that in that clip, the song she's talking about that had been promised to her and which you've named the box set after was Make It Easy on Yourself, which Jerry Butler obviously had the hit with, and which I do think he was the right guy to sing that song. Anyway, let's move on to the second clip, because it brings us back to Aretha, and it's another song she reworks on the Now album, the Immortal, I Say a Little Prayer. So this is you asking Dionne about the, frankly, much more famous version by Aretha.
Well, what did you think when you heard Aretha's version of it? Did you really?
I love Aretha.
Right.
Aretha is one of my dear friends, and has been since we were teenagers, since how long we've known each other.
Yes.
And to think that she would even want to record something I've recorded before is quite a compliment, insofar as I'm concerned.
Yes.
And for her to have a massive hit record with it made me feel very good for her.
Really?
Yes, it did.
And it's quite different. Of course, the arrangement is different.
It's Aretha.
I say a little prayer for you. Forever, forever, you'll stay in my heart, and I will love you forever, ever. We're part of how I love you. Together, that's how it must be to live without you. Would only be heartbreak for me.
Well, that's very gracious of her.
I could insert further comments, but I won't. In the interest of prevailing of peace and love, I will not say any more about that.
No, she does sound at moments in the interview a little. She's a bit spiky, isn't she? She's a bit. She's a diva.
Well, it's funny, I mean, I've spent many, many hours with Dionne over years and years and years. At one point, we were going to collaborate on what would have been an autobiography, but at the time, just as well, it wasn't, because it's prior to That's What Friends Are For and so forth. But I spent a lot of time with her. And there's an element of coolness.
Yes.
It's who she is as a human being, even if you get to know her. Now, I've been in conversations where she told me jokes, and so there's that part of her. But there's a certain kind of reserved approach which you can hear in how she conducts interviews. And I've been able to make her laugh in some of the interviews, but there is a certain kind of it's a certain kind of detachment. So I'd say that's part of her personality.
Yes, and you definitely hear that in this interview. A very different. The reason I use the word diva is because you wrote a book called The Soulful Divas. So I mean, I'm not trying to genderize this in any way. A very different diva, quote unquote, is the great Chaka Khan. Yes. Another woman who you befriended, and this is an interview from much later on than, say, the Aretha thing, 2007, and you started by saying, "I've been talking to Chaka Khan since 1974. Through the years, I've been a witness to her Through the Fire days, her Almost Have It Together days, her I'm Ready for the World days, and her Where the Fuck Am I days," which I love that intro, and it's a great interview. It's about an album that Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis essentially produced or executive produced. I can't remember, called Funk This.
Yes.
And it's her talking about, because one of the things that I love, you ask what her favorite album is of hers, and she says it's What You're Gonna Do For Me, which is I know Mark and I rate that as absolutely one of. I mean, because actually it was one of the first albums I reviewed for NME, and I was astonished by it. I still think it sounds awesome. And she says she talks about she was in a good place in her life and living in Montreux, which I didn't even know. And then she says, and when I'm working with Arif Mardin and having the best musicians on the planet, we had the best of everything on that album. Steve Ferroni from the Average White Band on drums, the Brecker brothers on horns. And she doesn't actually mention Anthony Jackson's bass play, which I know, Mark, but it is just some of the greatest bass play ever, right? So, but just tell us about the phenomenon that was Chaka Khan, that is Chaka Khan.
Well, phenomenon is a good word. I mean, it kind of pretty much what you recreated there in terms of how I talked about her through the different phases of her career and life. It's interesting, just let me say that when you mentioned What You're Going to Do For Me, it is also one of my absolute favorite albums. And there's a song there that I'm not ashamed to say, I Know You, I Live You, which was my get up in the morning, exercise workout to the extended version. When I lived in LA, I used to get up in the morning, put that on and dance like a maniac around my front living room, in my living room to that. That was my workout song.
It's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal piece of music.
I think that particular track is one of the best recordings of all time.
Yes.
And Arif Mardin, absolute genius.
Yes.
I had the opportunity to meet him. I interviewed him a couple of times. Just an incredible human being. So articulate and so skilled and just great. So with Chaka, go back to Chaka. So yeah, I think that what I find most intriguing in a sense is that she has reinvented herself several times. She's been definitely through the fire.
Yep.
In more ways than 10. And, but what I'm aware of, what it points to is when someone is a survivor of life in a sense and just continues on and reinvents herself constantly, it is a matter of, it's something to see and be in awe of. I mean, really, I've seen Chaka, and she knows this, when she was not in a what's the right word of this? She wasn't as coherent.
This is a fantastic TV special on BB King, which has got Etta James, Gladys Knight, and Chaka on it. And there's one point where Etta and Gladys are holding Chaka up. I mean, she is literally being held up by the other two ladies.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've had some conversations with her, like very personal conversations with her about, what she's dealt with and so forth. But the point being that to be able to come through that and here in 2025 to have actually not only come through it, but transcended it to the point where she's not, household name is a bit of I don't like to use that term, and I don't know that we would consider a household name, but certainly some of her recordings are epic. They're classic. And I saw about maybe a month or so ago, more than that, at Hampton Court Festival she was at. And the energy and the response of the audience, the response of the crowd lets you know that she could just do those 3 songs and that would be fine. That would be enough. Because they're classics, but the energy, everything that she's created it does make her like I can't even really find a word. There's to be that at 73, I think. Yeah, she's a few years younger than me.
I think they've really lived on, those songs, because, there's a real vitality to them. Like, my generation loves Chaka Khan. I've no doubt that successor generation loves Chaka Khan. And I think the way that comes through also with her being sampled in hip hop. And there's just something about her records that's very youthful and vital in that way. And I think that you can really feel that through the music.
I think the only thing I would say that is really that in conversations with her, I can tell the one thing that is not yet really fully happened is her being able to do music that's just art. Because in essence, from earliest conversations, she is an artist. No, I mean, when I say artist, I don't mean just using the word in the way we usually use it, but she honors her artistry, and she hasn't had an opportunity often to express it because of how her music developed with Rufus, and just kind of to go left in a sense and do a whole album of jazz. Or she has done some things like that. I mean, the most potent example for me is there's a project she's wanted to do for years, and we began working on it. I say we are connected with a record company that was interested in doing it. And it's an album that she still says she's going to do, which is the songs of Joni Mitchell, because they're good buddies. Yes. And when it was first suggested, I was like, why? That doesn't fit. But it does, because of what Chaka brings to Joni's songs. So that's the thing I think she has never fully been able to bring to the public, because the public doesn't want it. Well, the public, her public, doesn't really want that. They want what they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, she is unorthodox. I mean, just as Dionne is kind of unorthodox in many ways, I think Chaka is an unorthodox sort of soul singer and artist. I saw Rufus live in, I think it was 75, and that was not many soul singers come out of a band like that. They were very pioneering mixed race, mixed genre kind of band, weren't they?
Absolutely.
So that was her sort of grounding. That's what she came out of. You mentioned Arif Mardin earlier, and he also famously produced the Bee Gees, as I'm sure many of our listeners know, starting with 1974's Mr. Natural album and continuing with an album that turns 50 this summer. And I'm talking, of course, about Main Course, which revived a career that had been, well, in the doldrums, shall we say, for at least 3 years. And I just thought it'd be worth just talking about that moment when the Bee Gees sort of discover disco and almost like play a part in the disco revolution. And I'll just mention, so one of the pieces that we're featuring on the homepage is an oral history of Main Course by Johnny Black for Q in April 2000. And he quotes, he says, Robin Gibbs says, we were in a real dead zone. No one wanted to hear us, and the record company wasn't interested. And Barry then says, we ended up at Batley Variety Club. And he says, I remember us talking about it backstage. And I said, if this is the bottom, there's no further we can fall. But just short version, they end up in Miami, where Eric Clapton has made the 461 Ocean Boulevard album, and Arif meets them there. I think Criteria Studios. Yes. And this album comes out of it. We have a piece from 1975, Charles Berman talking about them. And Barry says, being in America when we recorded helped us. This is about Main Course. When we wrote the album, we were listening to a lot of radio. We tried to get an idea of what people wanted to hear from anyone. The main vein at that moment was soul, R&B, disco. So we moved into that area. And I'll finish just by saying, I remember when I first heard Jive talking. Mark may remember this. You may have had similar. I remember hearing that on the radio and just thinking, "Wow, what an incredible record!" Just the drumming.
It took me longer to work out that it was as good as it was, because my prejudices against the Bee Gees were so deep.
Fair enough.
That I almost refused to accept that they could possibly make a good record. But yeah, that's a really good record.
I mean, the drumming, Dennis Byron, who died last year, had played drums, I think, at Amen Corner. But he was an extraordinarily great drummer, I think, and played with the Bee Gees for numbers. He brought Blue Weaver in, who'd also played with Amy. And so a huge part of what made Main Course so special was the Moog, the Moog and synthesizer work that Blue Weaver brought in. It was just a completely new sound, and you can hear it all over the record. There's also Nights on Broadway, right?
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, David, what was your view of the Bee Gees, of disco and of like white people making disco music?
Well, okay. Well, a few things actually. Firstly, of note, we were talking about Chaka Khan and Rufus. As you may know, hopefully know, that they did record Jive Talking. There's a version of Jive Talking on a Rufus album. Either that or they did it in live performance. I think it's on an album. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yes. Anyway, as an aside, at the time you're talking about, I was living in New York. Now, correct me if the album came out in 1975, right?
It did. So it's 50 years old this summer. Yeah,
exactly. So I can give you some reference for this because I've arrived in New York in February of 1975. Began my writing for blues and soul from New York, and as it so happened, there was a group that was signed to RSO Records called Revelation. And Revelation was a 4-man black music gospel influenced quartet that included Arnold McCullough, Philip Ballou, was other people in it, Benny Diggs, and Arthur Freeman. And I saw them in a showcase in November of 1974, and the record came out in 1975. Now, where does the Bee Gees fit into this? Because Revelation were an opening act for the Bee Gees, and in particular, somewhere I have a review of the Bee Gees in Central Park with Revelation's opening act. Okay. And I have to say that it didn't really matter what color they were, the Bee Gees, because I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I mean, New York, 1975, I'm as much in the burgeoning world of disco as anyone else. I mean, I was 20-something years old. I would go out clubs, blah, blah, blah. So obviously I didn't, was fascinated with the falsetto voice anyway, but I love those records. I absolutely, and I didn't think of them, funnily enough, I didn't think of them as white. I thought of them as British, even though they were Australian, sorry. But I knew the music. I knew them from when I grew up in London, England. So I was aware of the Bee Gees. But, I think the music was so, it was kind of universal. I mean, you mentioned Nights on Broadway and of course, one of the versions of Nights on Broadway that I've always loved is Candy Staton. Yeah. But the point we're making is, in fact, that the music transcended, in a sense, race. And I thought those recordings were great. I loved them. I danced to them. I did a little attempt to sing Jive Talking in the highest falsetto I could, and probably hurt my throat in the process. But yeah, so I was, totally. And I think I pretty much can say this with some conviction that when you go to a club and listen to music, at the time, and nobody thought, the Bee Gees, they're white or they're not American or they're not black. I mean, you just listen to music and dance to it. And that's what really, and it was very well done. It was excellent. It was really well done. Yeah.
Well, and Arif had so much to do with
Absolutely.
that. You mentioned the falsetto, and I just wanted to, so the third of the pieces that we're featuring in connection with the Bee Gees and Arif is an interview that Tom Doyle did with the late Arif Mardin in 2004 for Sound on Sound. It's like a techie magazine, Muso magazine. And he asks Arif about the Bee Gees and the falsetto vocal sound. And Arif says, look, I didn't say, hey, sing falsetto, because I'd like to invent this sound for you. But there was a melody in one of the songs. It might have been Jive Talking. And I said, can you take it up an octave, please? And Barry said, if I take it up an octave and shout like an opera singer, I'll sound like a fool. Let me sing it in a soft voice. So he sang it in that voice. And the brothers and everyone was saying, that's great. That's great. Keep that. That's how it came about. But I didn't say, I want you to sing falsetto here. I just said, kick it up an octave. So that extraordinary blend of like falsetto harmony voices that came out of that moment.
Well, one thing I want to say is you mentioned the Bee Gees because Bee Gees also impacted the career of one of the previously referred to Nina Simone, because one of her hits, so to speak, particularly in Britain, was a follow-up to "Ain't Got No, I Got Life" when she had recorded "To Love Somebody" for RCA Records, and they didn't know what to release as a follow-up. So they asked me and my sister, who was also in charge of the Appreciation Society at the time, what we suggested, and we had gotten an early copy of "To Love Somebody," and we suggested that as a follow-up, and of course it became a hit for Nina in Britain. But it's interesting that someone like a Nina Simone, so to speak, would pick music by the Bee Gees. She also did a couple of their other songs. I Can't See Nobody, a couple of other things. So that they, even prior to being an influence on disco and dance music, they were impacting other artists like a Nina, which you would not expect in a sense. In 1968, I mean, so which speaks to something about their also their longevity and their ability to in a sense move genres, but just through their writing and the songs. I mean, To Love Somebody and Jive Talking are a little bit further apart, but it's still the same group.
Well, there's an incredible Southern Soul version of "To Love Somebody" by the great James Carr, which is superb. And I'm thinking also Al Green did "How Do You Mend a Broken Heart."
I mean that. I mean that. I remember when that came out because I was still in London and I was working at Contempo, which was a record shop that was part of Blues and Soul empire, so to speak. And that track was it. I mean, you put that on in the shop and it will go to buy it. And it's just extraordinary. I mean, that to me is the version of the song.
Yeah, just phenomenal. So in New York, you interview everybody, and a lot of people in the kind of disco era: Van McCoy, Chic, Evelyn Champagne King, but also like Esther Phillips, Earth, Wind and Fire, Tom Bell, Luther, when he was still just Luther, not Luther Vandross, the Jacksons. So, I mean, all these people. And then in 1984, you moved to Los Angeles, where Mark and I first met you many years ago. We came to see you there. Yeah, to recruit you for Rock's Back Pages. Recruit. And when you're there, between 1984 and when we met you, you interviewed like Rick James, Babyface, Michael McDonald. I mean, and you sort of saw the whole evolution of R&B into sort of things like New Jack Swing and all of that. And also hip hop, right? I mean, you didn't write a huge amount about hip hop, but you certainly saw the evolution of R&B. What was different about being in Los Angeles for you? And did you ultimately enjoy that as much as New York, or was it just a different experience?
Well, two things. Firstly, I lived in Los Angeles briefly in 1975 for about 6 months. I had lived in New York, obviously, prior to that. And then through a good dear friend of mine, the late Doris Troy, I came to visit LA and doing some things there for Blues and Soul, actually. And when I went to visit Doris, and she was expressing the joy of LA, I thought, well, I've never been anywhere which has the palm trees and beach. And Doris was fun. She says, baby, you should come and live there. That's how she spoke. Baby, you should come and live in LA. So I moved for about 6 months, but I couldn't deal with it. It was too slow. And it was like, no, not the time. So fast forward to 1984. And I actually spent 3 months in LA in 1983 working with Dionne, actually. And I got used to it. I liked it. I was like, well, okay. Now, still living in New York, essentially. And then in 1984, moved to LA to write a book. It was an illustrated biography of Lionel Richie. He didn't wasn't a part of the process, but it helped that I was there. And that was why I came to live there. And I thought I was going to be there for about a year. And a year turned into 24 years. It was the longest time I've ever lived anywhere. And it was a very different world in 1984 in terms of music. I mean, I as you pointed out, Barney, it was a great time for me in terms of as a writer to do a lot of work and interview a very vast array of artists. I got used to it. I mean, look, it's difficult for having grown up in London, it's difficult to not love sunshine. But it wasn't that. The second time I was there, I got more into the pace of it. I had 9 years in New York prior to that, and I was okay with it was slower. I mean, when I say slow, it doesn't mean I had nothing to do, but actually being out there, living every day, it doesn't have the same flavor. And I didn't drive, and I still haven't never driven a car.
Well, I think I remember that about when we came to.
You do.
I do remember thinking, how the hell does he survive in this city without wheels?
Well, it was called the 212 bus.
The
212 bus, yes. By the way, I have a little side story about the 212 bus, very quick story. So when I first interviewed Anita Baker, this is true. She had lived in LA before she made her Rapture album. And in fact, I think this might be the same time period. And one day I was getting ready to go to do a second interview with her. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm late. I had to get the bus. And she said, which number? And I said, 212. She said, I used to take the 212 bus from wherever she was in Burbank. So I said, well, we share a love of the 212. The other thing was I got taxis. I mean, I didn't get them all the time, but yeah.
I mean, you must have missed. I mean, aren't you telling me that you in New York used to go to the Paradise Garage and see Larry Levan DJ?
Yeah.
You must have missed that kind of scene in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Well, LA had its own equivalent. There was a place called Catch One, which was, I didn't come up with the name, but yeah, that was an equivalent. And there were other clubs in Los Angeles. It didn't have the same kind of frenetic energy, but, it was still the same. And at that point, I was a little older. I was in my mid-30s, so it wasn't quite as much a disco bunny as I had been. So it wasn't quite the same thing. But yeah, I mean, there were places to go. The other thing to say is that at that time, a lot of the record companies that were making a noise, so to speak, were in LA. Think about Solar Records. Because Motown was already there. So it wasn't such a terrible place to be in that way. I mean, there was still a lot going on. I mean, once I got established here, the thing that made a difference, I think, after a few years was me writing for Billboard, because Billboard's office was in LA. I mean, the biggest part of the. Well, was that their main office? Well, all I know is
New York, but
yeah, exactly. But LA was a thriving office, and so I got a lot of my work from Billboard, from initially Nelson George, and then whoever took on from there, the other editors that became the R&B editors. So that kept me going, and then I wrote for a magazine called Black Radio Exclusive. And so really was it was a good time period in terms of my work life. And, I think Billboard probably was a thing that gave me the access to artists, because Billboard was it. I mean, yes, Blues and Soul was great, but if you were associated with Billboard, it's kind of a different level.
Yeah.
And, and so, I spent, you can't spend 24 years in a place without enjoying it. You can't. I mean, I had many adventures, some of which we'll have to go into my steamy Netflix series sometime. And it is steamy, trust me. LA is a steamy kind of place. We can be.
Well, we can't wait.
I know, I can't
series.
either. It may change my image definitively. Go on.
What? Just briefly.
Yes.
Because we just got a few other things to wrap up the episode.
Yeah, sure.
What brought you back to the UK in 2009? Does LA get too steamy for you?
Well, no, it didn't. But what it was actually I left LA in 2008, should say, to spend a forgettably unforgettable 10 months in Philadelphia. There's a lot to do with the unforgettably forgettable part. I was lured to it by Kenny Gamble, who said, "Oh, if you move to LA," because I was like, if you move to Philadelphia, I mean, I spent 24 years in LA, and personal things. My sister lived there; she moved back to England. My best friend Michael, who was one of my business partners in LA, he moved to DC. I had a cat, never decided to leave. So it was kind of like many of the foundational aspects of my life were not there. I was working a lot with the Rhythm and Blues Foundation, which was originally based in DC and had been moved to Philadelphia, thanks to Kenny Gamble. I'd say he played a big part in doing that. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm kind of thinking of leaving LA. And so famous words from Kenny Gamble, you'll be a big fish in a small pond. I don't know where he meant, because of my work as a journalist and a media coach and the different things I was doing. And it just was not a great experience, to be honest with you. I lived in South Philly, and people would look at me like I was an alien. Well, I was an alien technically, but, a different kind of alien. And it was uncomfortable. And I just didn't like it. I just didn't like being in that environment. And so I think for other reasons, like my health, I thought, as I'm getting older, do I want to continue to live in America where I would have just, challenges with healthcare? And I talked to my sister, and I said, can I come and stay for 3 months, see how I like it? And she said, sure. And that was in 2009. And I said, I could do this. And I also was thinking of my future. So I went back and packed my belongings, and, or as Rufus and Chaka would say, packed my bags, and went to London, came to London. And it, to be honest with you, it was a difficult adjustment to begin with.
Okay. Well, listen, I mean, we could talk about the subsequent years, but we're slightly running out of time. I do want to thank you so much for talking with us about your career. It's been really, really enjoyable. Yeah. And we've been talking about a lot of music we all love. And that's been really special for me. We do want to just say goodbye to a fellow RBP contributor of yours, Michael Lydon, another white writer on incredible black music, and one of the first, one of the important early writers, American writers, New York based. When Michael, who came on board early in the RBP story, joined us, he sent us a sort of, like a little kind of bio of his life. So this is part of what he wrote. He said, in 1964, I panned the Beatles in the college paper. He was at Yale. I panned the Beatles in the college paper and praised Martha and the Vandellas instead. That was his first rock writing. So that tells you where his heart lay. After covering civil rights in Mississippi, I reported on Swinging London for Newsweek. An interview with John, who was abrasive, and Paul, who was charming, converted me to the Beatles. Then I transferred to San Francisco as Haight-Ashbury hippies made headlines. The Fillmore was my beat. Janis Joplin and Jerry Garcia, my inside sources. At Monterey Pop, I sat mind blown in the press section. Exciting days. My hair grew. I quit Newsweek. I helped start Rolling Stone. I hitchhiked to LA to join the Stones on the wild ride to Altamont. And then he talks about his books, his first book, Rock Folk, which came out in 1971. So I think probably on that trip to America when we first met you, we went to see Michael in Greenwich Village, Mark and I. And he died about a week, 10 days ago, at the age of 82. And I felt really sad. He was such a charming, really, really likable man, wasn't he, Mark?
Yes.
And so our sort of way of paying tribute really is to, so he sent us tons of incredible pieces. He also sent us 3 or 4 audio interviews. And I thought we would listen to him introducing this interview with Wilson Pickett, the great, wicked Wilson Pickett from 1977. He and his, I think, wife, certainly his girlfriend the photographer Ellen Mandel. They went to Englewood Cliffs in New Jersey to interview Wilson. And this is Michael introducing the interview later, and then we'll hear a bit of the Wicked One.
Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better.
Hi, I'm Michael Lydon. In May of 1977, myself and photographer Ellen Mandel went out to Wilson Pickett's house in Englewood, New Jersey for an interview. With us was publicist Lee Wade, a good friend of ours and still a good friend of ours. Wilson met us. He was friendliness itself. He chatted volubly for 2 hours about his life and career. I had heard stories, and I still hear stories, that Wilson Pickett truly was the wicked Pickett, a difficult man to deal with, often angry and suspicious. But to us, he was friendliness, cheerful, handsome, and delightful. So this is a interview slightly edited, by which I mean I took out gaps and pauses and unnecessary repeats, and I did my best to minimize the airplane noise from the constantly flying overhead. But the sound quality isn't bad, and I think you'll find this a refreshing look at the true man Wilson Pickett when he was just past the height of his career, but still a very active and dedicated performer. Enjoy.
I enjoyed doing Hey Jude by the Beatles. That's when
that was a big record.
I discovered Duane Allman. See, that was the first record Duane Allman ever played on. And I remember we was cutting the session. We got him out of Florida. He was in Miami, Florida. We got him out of Florida and brought him into Muscles Show, and we did a session with him. I'll tell you what the freak done. I mean, he's dead now. He put 2 capsules of masculine in the water tank. Now, see, I named him Skyman because he stayed so fucking high all the time, you know? So, you know, it just so happened I didn't drink no water, but I noticed everybody was acting strange right now. Engineer was all fucked up, man, and I said, maybe we ought to cancel a session tonight. And Skyman, he come in, he said, man, you know what I done, man? I said, no. He said, man, I put 2 pills in the water tank, baby. I said, wow, you dumbass. Fucked my session up, man. But I loved him. I mean, he made up for it the next day. I mean, he could play when he's, you know. Like I Found a Love, this cat was high on a Georgia pine. I mean, not I Found a Love, Hey Jude. He's the one playing all that fantastic guitar. People were going crazy. The secretaries, you know.
That's fantastic.
I mean, he's just got wonderful kind of comic delivery and timing. Yeah. But this is just to say farewell to Michael Lydon. I think one of the greats. And and on that note, we just the last bit of the show is just Mark and Jasper just tell us about some of the highlights of the pieces they've added in recent weeks.
Yeah, I got about three here, which are all pretty good. Dennis Wilson, Beach Boy Dennis Wilson, being interviewed by Ronnie Oberman for the Washington, D.C. Evening Star in 1965, says, "There is only one group, and that is the Beatles. The rest are a backwash. The Stones, all they do is make a lot of noise. I think the image is unbelievable. Who wants an image of looking sloppy?" So that was Dennis Wilson being fairly rude about the Rolling Stones. This will be the next two right up your street, David. This first one is Lorraine Altman interviewing Bobby Womack for Melody Maker in 1972. And he says, Sly Stone told me, you know, man, you just don't know what the heck you're going to do. He said, you just got to make up your mind. Start telling the truth for once in your life. Just deal with it. He said, I sing songs about getting high because I get high. He said, you don't hear me singing I love you, honey. If you come to me and the stars will fall out of the sky, I will buy you a diamond ring and the best of everything. He said, that's old jive, man. I said, yeah, man, that makes a lot of sense. And lastly, this is marvellous. Maurice White of Earth, Wind and Fire to Jim Farber, 1978 in Crawdaddy. I was involved in pyramids and Egyptology long before it became commercial. Since I moved to California, I found that my roots lie in Egypt. So then I got very fascinated with the civilization and the accomplishments they made. some people are misinformed about how the pyramids was arrived. There were extraterrestrial beings involved. That's my lot.
Interesting that you might have noticed or didn't notice that I wear an ankh. It's an Egyptian symbol. That directly comes from my first conversation with Maurice White in 1975. So it's a very interesting segue.
So
you didn't know it would be, but there you go.
So do you believe that the pyramids are to do with extraterrestrial beings?
Well, I've been to Egypt. I've been to that part of Egypt. In 1984 is when I went there. When you see people see photographs of them. That's one thing. When you're actually standing in front of the pyramids and you see how enormous they are, it beggars belief that human beings could have created. I'm not saying I can't definitively tell you that I know that, but when you look at them, you cannot fathom how they got built. I mean, how could they, I don't know. I mean, the answer to your question is I don't know, but I do know from working with Maurice directly for about a year in 1985 when he was head solo album. I got to be in conversations with him a lot about that there's so much we don't know. There's so much we think we know, and we have a certain kind of arrogance as human beings to think that we know everything, and that's not possible. But, I don't know if I would suspect, I don't know. I can't answer your question. I don't know if they were built that way, but I don't know how human beings could have built them. They're those blocks, they're not like tiny little blocks. They're like massive. And how would they have even... Yeah, but anyway. So
extraterrestrials it is. Extraterrestrials
there you go. A perfect note to end. The Ankh and the extraterrestrials.
That's great. Fantastic.
Lovely.
Jasper, what have you got for us? Anything
I've got
extraterrestrial?
2 things. No extraterrestrials, I'm afraid. I've got one thing to lower the tone and then one thing to raise it back up again. So I'll start with the lowering, which is Creed at Freedom Hall in Louisville, reviewed by Ian Winwood in Kerrang in January 2001. And it's just a hysterical, total demolition job of a piece. Jesus Christ, he writes, how did this happen? Tonight in a cold, cavernous sports arena in the freezing outskirts of Louisville, Kentucky, I witnessed Creed, the most popular, profitable, and airplayed rock band in America, on stage, live. I also witness, on stage live, the dullest, most pompous, monotonous, lumpen, clumsy, sexless, graceless, pious, preachy, straight-faced, one-paced, dull thud, power rock farce since... Actually, there is no since. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new winner. I mean, it is... it goes on. It's a brilliant piece of writing. It's just hilarious. And I mean, Creed are awful. And it's lovely to see.
Yeah, I got to say, Jasper played some Creed in the office yesterday, and we were all screaming.
I missed that.
We were all screaming, "Take that stuff off!"
I think I turned it off again after about half a song. It was bad enough.
Where was I when I probably had my headphones on? Yeah, I time my naps well. Secret's out. I have naps. I'm not ashamed.
Me too, my friend. Me too. Crucial.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, the extraterrestrials had naps.
For sure.
Well,
for sure,
I don't think they did. I think they just flew off and said, we'll leave them to work it out for themselves.
Jasper, what else have you got?
How are you going to raise it back up again, Jasper?
The second thing is From Kingston with Love by Lloyd Bradley in the Daily Telegraph, September 2000. And I just thought, since it's Carnival this weekend, and indeed I live on the Carnival route and I'm very much looking forward to it, I just thought it was an interesting piece. I mean, it's him tracing the history and influence of reggae music in Britain. And he mentions, he writes, when downtown Kingston fetched up in West London 40 years ago, sound system equipment, powerful, massively speakered, bass-heavy mobile disco gear, was viewed with suspicion. Today, Jar Vigo runs the People's Record Store, a red, green and gold painted shop in Ladbroke Groves, All Saints Road, still there. He first arrived in the UK as a teenager and began work around 1956 as a DJ on London's original Jamaican sound system called Duke Vin the Ticklers. When we asked an engineer to build us a 200-watt amplifier, he said, where are they going to play that much wattage? They'll kill people. but we have to do our own thing because so many places wouldn't let black men in. We keep dances in houses, basements, shebeens, or in school dinner halls, Vigo recalls. And I mean, of course, this weekend, the dances will be all over the streets. I think it's roughly 2 million people that arrive in Notting Hill over 2 days for the carnival.
I also live on the carnival routes. I'll be escaping. And my flat shakes with bashment for 2 days, and I'm 69. I'm just too old to be around.
You're allowed to escape.
Although,
I'm very much looking forward to it. I think it's one of the great summer events, definitely the best summer event in London.
Of course, Lloyd Bradley's break in music journalism was turning up with Tom Vickers and Earth, Wind and Fire at the Blues and Soul offices. And he basically went up and kind of blagged a job from Blues and Soul.
Wow.
And that's how he started writing. So,
well, and interestingly, Tom Vickers, the former Minister of Information for the P-Funk empire, stopped in at RBP Towers last week, and with him he had a couple of things that Lloyd had given him to do with P-Funk. One was a big Uncle Jam Wants You poster, and I can't remember. Then we scanned them for Tom, didn't we, Jasper?
Yes, we did indeed.
And it was lovely to see him, and we send our regards to Lloyd as well. So thanks for that. Have a good carnival. I'll be having a nap.
Thank you. By the time this goes out, carnival will be done. So I hope everyone is.
Jasper, can I tell you and all involved? I was at the very first. Yes, it's true. I was at the very, very first Notting Hill Carnival because at the time I lived in Ladbroke Grove, lived on a street called Bassett Road, and my flatmate Patricia and I and our other two flatmates, Michael and Raymond. It was just. I mean, I remember it was about probably 50 people with a couple of steel bands. I mean, it was, I can actually see it. I remember exactly where it was. We went just up and down the road behind the tube station, and that was it. I mean, and to imagine that it has become an event that has 2 million people is actually beyond any comprehension I have at all.
Is your mind duly blown, David?
Well, fortunately, I've avoided taking any substances. So my mind is, if my mind is ever blown, is blown by real life rather than any induced blowing of mind. How's that? Yes, but it is. I mean, the 2 million people, man. Yeah, absolutely. It's
wonderful.
Just amazing. Yeah.
Well, happy carnival out there to any listeners who may be attending. Look out for Jasper. You won't see Mark. You won't see me. David? Probably not David either.
No, you won't see me for sure. No. I will not venture forth. No.
That brings us to the end of episode 209 of the Rock's Back Pages podcast. Many thanks to the British Ambassador of Soul for joining us today. It's been great fun, David.
Thank you.
If you listeners out there enjoy our podcast, please follow it on whichever platforms you use. Please also think about subscribing to Rock's Back Pages itself, or check to see if your local library or academic institution subscribes. And if they don't, maybe suggest they take a free trial of the world's largest archive of music journalism. We'll be back in a fortnight with The Guardian's chief pop writer, Alexis Petridis. But for now, it's goodbye from Mark, Jasper and me, and from our guest, David Nathan. So all together in very imperfect harmony, as I always say, goodbye.
That concludes episode 209 of the Rock's Back Pages podcast. Many thanks to special guest David Nathan. Visit his website at davidnathan.com. Dionne Warwick, Make It Easy on Yourself, the Scepter Recordings 1962 to 1971 is out now on Soul Music Records. Those were Barney Hoskins and Mark Pringle, and it was co-hosted and produced by Jasper Murison Bowie. The Rock's Back Pages podcast is part of the Pantheon Podcast Network. You can find thousands of articles, as well as hundreds of full-length audio interviews at rocksbackpages.com.